Welcome to the Top Secret Wedding Podcast, and today's top secret tip is if you find yourself putting things in your contract that you're not really willing to go to bat for on the wedding day, probably doesn't belong in your contract.
Want to learn how to protect yourself through preparation? Listen to this episode.
This is the Top Secret Wedding Podcast, where we share top secret tips to help you take your wedding game to the next level.
I'm Annika, and I'm a wedding coordinator, enthusiast, and venue manager for one of the best venues in Idaho.
I'm Chris, and I'm a DJ, master of ceremonies, and all-around lover of weddings.
We're on a mission to improve weddings and wedding professionals everywhere.
Today, we are talking about protecting yourself through preparation. What does that mean?
I mean, really, it's so important. It's how you're going to prepare in order to protect yourself,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think there's a few different areas where you can think about protecting yourself. Obviously, legally, you want to be able to protect yourself legally. I always think if you don't have something in place, that's the time that you're going to need it, right? Like just by fate or something.
Right. Yeah.
So if you don't have a contract in place, that's the time that you really needed it. So legally, I think also your performance, to make sure that you're protecting your performance, the integrity of what you do. Protecting your reviews, I think, is important, and protecting your clients as well, and also your employees. So there are just some steps that I think you can take, and we won't cover every single one, but there are some steps that you can take that I think can really help just make you feel more confident in going through your everyday work in your business.
Yeah, I will say too, even everything that we covered today, unfortunately, just the nature of it, there's going to be something we don't hit.
For sure.
And when it happens, that's when you figure it out. And you're like, oh, that's just the nature of it. But, that's the biggest learning to it all. And
yeah, you have to go through those. You have to learn those lessons. You have to learn how to do it the wrong way so you can do it the right way.
Exactly.
So for me, I really think, I actually didn't put this on here, but now that I'm thinking about it, it starts with your messaging to your clients through your marketing, through your website, through your social media. All of those things can really help set the tone for what you offer and what you do for your clients, so that when you get on the sales call, you're not having to re-educate your clients on what you do.
1000%. I completely agree. I think too, with your wording and messaging, that's going to give them the expectation. If you're very casual, they're going to be like, oh, well, this is going to be very casual. But if you're, a little more professional, not as casual, it's going to set a different expectation.
Yeah, I had a client call me, and it turns out we couldn't actually do his wedding. But he called me, and I said, well, I'm not available, but this other guy is. And he said, oh, I looked at his website, and it wasn't good. And that tells me that his performance is not going to be good. I was like, whoa, that's quite a leap. But
it's it's not true, but the perception of it is totally true.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and funny thing, I helped him, try and find somebody else, and couldn't actually help him find somebody, but I went out of my way, and he left me a review that said, really, I couldn't hire this guy, but he was awesome.
But he was great.
So, even if you don't pick up that business, you're still setting a tone and protecting yourself. Because, could you imagine it going the other way, saying, no, I'm not available, I'm already booked, you idiot.
Right.
Could have gone the other way. So you just got to protect yourself that way.
I completely agree.
So sales calls, do you do anything in particular when you're talking to a client for the first time? Is there anything in particular that you do to kind of protect your performance, your people, any of that?
That's a great question. So, as far as since we're a venue, our typical sales call is a tour. That's the first time. They typically have done all their research online, and then they're like, okay, let's go see it, know? But I think really having standardized policies in place, if that makes sense. Yeah. So one example I have is we always confirm before the appointment. Even if it was set the day before and they're like, hey, can I come tour tomorrow? Yeah. Day of, you call and you confirm.
Smart.
It's a smaller thing, but because we've had a lot of times where people are like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot. And yeah, I'll be there. Or if they're running late and you call 5 minutes in and you're like, hey, I just had you on the calendar for today. If you didn't confirm it, more often than not, they're like, wow, I've totally spaced it.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's a smaller example, but then you've got your staff there for no reason. And it's just, it's just sucky. Nobody likes a no-show.
Yeah.
But that's like a small policy we have in place to protect that so that doesn't happen.
Yeah. But you're setting yourself up for success if you're doing it that way. If you're confirming. I think also, when I talk to them, I set the expectations for what they're going to get when they hire me. I sometimes even use the phrase, hiring me is honestly a little bit more work on your part because I'm going to ask you to do more, but you're going to get more as well.
Exactly.
So that way, when I start asking them for details about their love story, they're not like, whoa.
They're not completely shocked. Yeah, exactly. You're setting up that expectation.
Yep, exactly. I also make it a habit. I always try and look for something, I have to phrase this carefully, but look for something that I can advise them on during the sales call. Not something that I really want to correct them on, but something I can advise them on.
Something to add value and show your worth.
Something to show that I am not just going to sit idly by and let them make all the decisions, that I'm going to help them. So, for example, a simple one is I ask them, how many people are you going to have at your ceremony? And they say, we'll have like 50, 75, something like that. And I tell them, okay, whether you hire me or not, outside, if you're having a ceremony, anything more than about 40 people, you're going to want some sort of sound reinforcement, some speakers, something, so that people can hear the officiant, right?
Yeah.
And that way they know, like, I'm a professional and I'm not just going to roll over. I'm going to help them through the process.
Yeah.
So
that's very smart.
Yeah, it helps.
Yeah. No, I love that.
Yeah.
So
another thing that this is, I think we've talked about this on the pet peeve episode, but hiring per hour versus hiring per event. I think hiring per event sets you up for success and protects you in case the event ends early. I have actually never, I don't know. I don't know what people do if they're planning to go to 8 o'clock, the wedding ends at 6 o'clock, and they hired a package that goes to 8 o'clock. Do the clients come back and ask for the 2 hours worth back? I don't know.
Right.
So I think hiring per event saves you.
Yeah, I think too, I feel like a lot of times as vendors, we don't give our clients, I don't know. I don't know what word I'm looking for, but we don't give them the credit that they deserve.
Yeah.
A lot of times with things like this, if you just talk to them logically, they'll get it. So instead of trying to like make the sale and be like, oh, well, you want this and try to, convince them.
Yeah.
Give them some credit. And if you just say, you know what, logically, like a lot of times we get people who are like, well, I only want to have my reception there. Do you do it by the hour? And instead of just going, no, that's crazy. Like,
right.
Instead use the logic, give them some credit and just say, we want you to have the best day possible. We don't want there to be multiple people using the grounds. Right. So we just rent it by the day so that you get full use and there's no one else. And then they're usually like, oh, well, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, give them some credit, just be logical and reason with them. And a lot of times they'll get it.
Yeah. I think my logic is better than everybody else's logic, right? That's the reason I use it.
Right.
And sometimes I'm wrong and I get that. But what I'm looking for in my clients are people that are aligned with what I believe.
Yes.
So if I give them my logic and they disagree with it, then that's good.
You're
because
probably not aligned.
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
So
it's really, again, it's protecting myself, making sure that I have the ideal client for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. With protecting yourself, a lot of times we'll get clients in who they kind of like to test the boundaries and say, okay, so this is what's included. But if I book, will you throw this in? Will you throw this in? And a good way to protect yourself is to stay true to your purpose and your values. Yeah. So, of course, you want to make that sale. And of course, if that helps you close it and say, you know what, I'll throw this in. It's not horrible, but stick to who you are to protect yourself. Because if you start throwing a bunch of stuff in, it just doesn't ring true, if that makes sense. Because then you'll get other clients that are like, hey, I heard you threw this in. Why didn't I get that? Or whatever. Like, protect yourself by staying true to yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, I wanted to talk about that with contracts. So when we had Sierra from Little Bird Boise on, she said that the contract is the bare minimum of what she offers. And I love that because you can set like, these are what you can absolutely expect from me.
Yeah.
But it sets you up to be able to fulfill more, to go above and beyond. So if they can see like, okay, in the contract, he's only going to do this, this, and this. But on the day of, he did these other 3 things too.
Yeah.
Which was awesome. We didn't expect him to do that. So I think that having that in your contract of what you absolutely will do, I think it sets you up for success.
Yeah, I totally agree. One kind of random thing with contracts too is, again, I think you need to use the logical side. Sometimes we'll get couples who come in and they read the contract, they're so excited to book, but they're like, I don't like this clause. Can you take that out?
Yeah.
And to protect yourself, like really your contract should be a non-negotiable. Like it's not a document that you go and negotiate with.
Right.
It's no, this is my contract. You can very politely, you can sign it or you don't have to. Like don't use that contract as a sales pitch.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I agree. I mean, I think there are some things, I guess, I don't know. Maybe I have to think about this, but in my contract, I'm thinking if there's anything I would negotiate out. And I don't think there are because I think my contract is 3 pages long, but it basically is like, I will show up and do a good job and you will pay me. Everything that I need will be provided for me and everything that you need, I will provide for you. There was one time so in my clause, I have, just to protect myself, I have something in there that says if the performance starts 10 minutes late that you get 10% off or something like that. I don't know. And a client wanted to remove that clause. And I was like, I'll remove it, but that's just there to protect you.
Right.
So, I think probably if you have things in your contract that are negotiable, then they shouldn't be in your contract.
Yeah, that's the thing. You got to use your best judgment because even like we'll negotiate some things in terms of, if we decide, oh, hey, we want to throw in the dance floor, then yes, we will adjust that. I am a very firm believer in never just completely changing it, but instead like use the little line through it to show that, well, it does cost this much, but you're getting it for this much.
Yes.
I think that is critical. You want to show what you're providing. That way they can't question, well, did I get a discount or not? But use your best discretion. The thing is a lot of times like we'll get people that are like, well, this is just one example, but we have a clause that it's so silly. We can't control the weather. Like,
I get it though.
We can't control the weather. And if the weather isn't cooperating, like it might affect your day. We can't stop rain from raining or whatever.
Right.
And we'll get people that'll be like, well, I don't like that. Can you take that out? And it's like,
can't.
I'm sorry, I can't. Like, so
I could take it out, but it's not going to affect the weather.
Right.
Like,
so you just have to be so careful when you're going to change your contract. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think you're right. Sometimes I see, man, we're really harping on this, but sometimes I see other DJs specifically say like anything that goes wrong, they add it to their contract. But the problem is, like, are you really going to enforce that on the day of the wedding?
Right.
Right? Like, I have to eat before everybody else. That's just a petty thing. I have to eat before everybody else or else I leave. Like, really? You're going to pack up in the middle of a wedding because you didn't get your lasagna or whatever. Like, I would be shocked. So, and for the record, I always eat last because I'm usually the one releasing tables, but that's a separate issue. But I think if it's not something that you are willing to go to bat for that clause on the day of,
then what's the point?
What's the point of it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say as well, I think it's so important for you to have multiple people read over your contract because something might make total sense to you, but someone else might be like, that doesn't make sense. Very similarly, when it comes to your clients signing your contract, I hate when people just blindly sign it.
Right.
No. So if someone says, hey, I want to book, and they're there, I say, hey, take a moment, read through the contract. As you go through it, let me know what questions you have. Because even if something is so clear as day to 90% of people, someone's not going to understand it correctly. Sure. So give your clients that opportunity to ask the questions and clarify. There's nothing worse than they signed it a year or two ago and now there's a question and they're like, well, I signed it, but that didn't make sense. Or well, I don't agree with that. Like, make sure they fully understand what they are signing.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's great. Yeah, I need to be more diligent about that. That's great.
It's a good way to protect yourself.
Yeah.
I think too, this one's a little harder to watch over, but make sure whoever is signing it, I guess whoever's not signing it, but is just as involved, is also aware. So if your bride is signing it, but her mother does not understand what she has signed, that's another
conflict. Yeah.
It can cause some issues. So that's another way to protect yourself.
Yeah. Side note, but I think maybe I've told you, but in my contract, I literally have a line that says, regardless of who pays for part or all of the wedding, the final decision lies with the couple.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I don't think we have that. That's nice.
Yeah. So that way, if like a mother of the bride comes and says, well, I pay, well, I don't care.
Right.
It's in the contract.
It should be on pet peeves, but I hate when people say that, when they're like, well, I'm paying for the wedding and I want this. And it's like, bless your soul, I don't care what you want. I care what the bride wants.
Yeah. That's right. Exactly.
So, I hate that.
Yeah. Another place that you can really protect yourself through preparation is in the planning phase. When you're planning, I think it's most couples have not been through this, right? I'd say probably 75% of couples that I deal with, maybe 90% this is their first marriage, and they've never been through this. And so it's important to lay out what the wedding is going to look like through the eyes of experience, as opposed to just, because sometimes I'm sure that you get it. I can think of one specific example that you shared with me, but I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, so I won't share it. But sometimes their vision does not line up with reality.
Yeah, no, exactly. The thing is they are looking to you to be the expert. Now, again, it's all how you present yourself. You don't want to be like, well, that's a stupid idea.
Right.
But they're looking to you to be the expert, but it's a balance of being the expert, but also going along with what they want. If you have voiced the concern and the result, and they're still like, I want to do it, ultimately,
it's their decision.
It's their decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as there's nothing unsafe about it. Right. But yeah, I think we talked about this in the When to Say No episode, that, if they come to you with a suggestion and it's not going to work, instead of just saying, no, we're not going to do that, saying, well, what about this? And just redirect them to something that will work.
Yeah. Or again, give your clients some credit and explain it logically. Yeah. And a lot of times they'll be like, oh, I didn't think about that. That makes sense.
Totally.
So,
Yeah.
I think too, in the planning process, I'm going to bring up that quote again, but under communication leads to frustration.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And so, the experiences that I've had where things go wrong is because we didn't over communicate.
Sure.
And so, again, I'm such a big advocate for having a paper trail. Make sure everything has a paper trail. That way they can't call your bluff if it's not a bluff. But just if there is anything, just communicate it. That's, a lot of frustrations are going to come when there is a lack of communication.
Yeah.
I won't go into details, but we just had a whole situation this last weekend. And honestly, it could have been completely avoided if there was over communication.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. They may get annoyed a little bit, like, why are you telling me this? But then in the moment, I can't tell you how many times I've tried to over communicate to an officiant that has never officiated before. And I say, please remember to invite them to be seated.
Right.
Invite the guests to be seated. You got it? Invite the guests to be seated. Okay? So when you start, invite the guests to be seated. And then the ceremony starts and they don't invite the guests to be seated.
The amount of ceremonies I have stood in the back waving to sit down is unreal.
Yeah, exactly. So over communication, and I think over communication more than once. Instead of just doing it one time, it should be different times, different meetings.
Yes.
If it's something very important.
Agreed. I think too, it should be different ways. So, again, always have a paper trail, but if you tell them in person, then send them a text, then send it in an email. Make sure it goes over different ways. People receive information better through different means of communication.
Yep.
So,
And through time, you understand what things are important to over communicate and what things don't really matter.
yeah, exactly.
Another thing that I like to over communicate, as far as the DJ side goes, the entertainment side, celebrating side, I think I like to tell them that the wedding is wherever they are. So and I just had a consultation with a couple yesterday, and I told them, listen, if the dancing is really important to you, not saying it has to be, but if the dancing is important to you, make sure you're on the dance floor, because if you're on the dance floor, guests are going to be on the dance floor. If you're by the fire pit, that's where guests are going to be.
Exactly.
So if you want everybody dancing, but you don't want to dance, just know that it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I love that.
I also tell them that I try and be honest with them about what the outcome of their plans are. And like you said earlier, if you go through it and you say, okay, based on my experience, your plan is going to lead to this, and they say, I don't care, I want to do it anyways, and they say, okay, sounds good. But I make sure that I voice my concerns, and I tell them specifically, this is what's going to happen. If you have music that is all indie music that nobody else knows, it's not going to lead to a full dance floor. So if you're okay with that, if the music is more important than the dancing, then that's great with me. I'm on board, but just know that that's the outcome. So that way when it happens, they can't say, nobody's dancing. You can say, well, I'm happy to make them dance, but...
Right. So, exactly. Again, that clear communication.
Yep.
So I totally agree.
This next point, protecting yourself through preparation. I mean, we've probably beat this to death, but backups.
Backup.
Have backups.
They're so important.
If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. If you have backups, you're also just going to feel confident that if something goes wrong, you're set.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing. I think I've said this before, but again, voicing that what the backups are, you don't even need to go super in depth. But if a bride comes to you and says, well, what happens if this happens?
Yeah.
And you can confidently say, don't worry about it. We've got backups. Don't even stress. That's just going to go over so much better. You're going to be confident in that answer, and it's going to show in your performance.
Yep, exactly. 100%. And the last thing is reviews. If you've done everything right and you've really killed it, then you should get a good review.
Yeah.
It really helps, though, if you prepare your client by using reviews in the sales process and then telling them before the wedding, that if we do a good job, and you can phrase it however you want, but if you do a good job, I'd love to see a good review from you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think, too, with reviews, we've mentioned this before, but just making it as easy as possible. Yeah. So even afterwards, having just like leave us a quick review or whatever, they're going to go they're going to do it if it's in their path, if that makes sense. You will get people who will go out of their way to look you up on Google and leave a review, but the odds are a lot less. One example for like a venue stance is have a little QR code somewhere that just says, have a great time, leave us a review. With us having a lodge, it doesn't have to be part of the wedding at all. It can just be even as simple as in the bathroom, have a good time, leave us a review. It doesn't take away from the wedding. It's right there in sight. So. Yep.
Alan Berg just had a podcast where he said something like, I have this note on my desk. I think it was a receipt from a restaurant. And he said, I'm leaving it there until I leave a review, but I need it in my face. And so you should be in your face politely with your client and remind them, because a lot of times they want to leave a review, but life gets busy.
Exactly. So, I agree. I mean, the amount of times I think, I should leave them a review. And then I'm like, I haven't done it. Yeah. So. Agreed. So,
there are a lot of things that you can do. I'm sure there's some things that we miss in regards to protecting yourself through preparation. If there's something that you think of that we missed, let us know. Maybe we'll do a part 2. But so essential. If you prepare, you're going to feel good and a lot less will go wrong.
Totally agreed.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
We'll see ya.
See you later. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Top Secret Wedding Podcast.
Subscribe, rate, and review us, and we'll see you next time.